So first of all, thank you very much for joining and welcome back. We're very happy to have you all here. And just to introduce myself again, I'm Jyoti Hosagrahar. I'm the Deputy Director of the World Heritage Center. We're very delighted to have with us today the Director of the World Heritage Center, Dr. Mechtild Rossler, who will speak in a moment to welcome all of you. Before I request her to speak, I just want to make sure that we all have please keep your microphones switched off the entire time until you have to speak. The chat box is open, so you can enter any comments you would like on the chat box and exchange with each other. As you see in the program, the way we've structured the program is that there is no discussion, so no questions until 2:15. So the idea is that we'd have several presentations and then questions raised. So please take notes of the questions you want to raise or put them in the chat box, but we will only come to them after 2:15. And then we have almost, we have more than an hour for discussion. So we'll have plenty of time for discussion, and we want a rich discussion, but we want you to hold on to your questions until it's time. And now over to Mechtild. Please, Dr. Rossler.
Thank you very much, Jyoti, and dear site managers, dear experts, and friends from all around the world. I think I know a number of you. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you today to the second session of the UNESCO World Heritage City Lab. At the first session of the City Lab on Wednesday, we were quite excited to host a high-level webinar on rethinking urban heritage for recovery and resilience, which gathered diverse panels of international mayors and experts to discuss about the ways to support World Heritage cities to recover from the current global crisis and be more resilient, while also protecting their outstanding universal value. This World Heritage City Lab gathers more than 50 experts from all across the globe to share, exchange, and develop effective strategies to better manage cultural heritage and respond to the urgent needs of local communities, especially in urban World Heritage sites. The World Heritage Committee, as you know, inscribes properties on the World Heritage List based on specific criteria recognizing the outstanding universal value. That's what we call normally OUV, including their conditions of authenticity and integrity. These sites from the shared heritage of humanity, these sites are the shared heritage of humanity under the convention. Almost all the countries, 193, but very soon 194 in the world have ratified the World Heritage Convention that oblige them to protect and conserve cultural and natural heritage for the benefit of future generations, and especially oblige them to protect the OUV of these inscribed properties. Now, World Heritage cities are also living cities. They are endowed with the capacity to support and adapt to the needs and aspirations of the local communities, especially in times of crisis, such as the one we are currently facing. For decades, UNESCO has been assisting World Heritage sites put in place concepts, tools, and processes for heritage management while advocating for a culture-based approach to sustainable development. And of course, we always work very closely together with our advisory bodies, ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICROM. I want just briefly to recall here a few key tools and processes that, as the experts in the regions, you often encounter. One is reactive monitoring, which is a key process under the World Heritage Convention, and you can all learn about in detail, and most of you have used already the operational guidelines, which you find on the website of the center. At its core, it is reporting on the state of conservation of specific World Heritage properties that are under threat. And believe me, the World Heritage Committee since the beginning looked at that. In general, any major intervention in or around properties, whether related to conservation or development, must be notified to the World Heritage Centre by the authorities prior to the beginning of works, because they could impact the OUV of the property. I have to tell you that this is often not the case, and that it's actually civil society which alerts us in many, many cases. More than 150 individual reports on the state of conservation of properties are presented at each session of the World Heritage Committee by the World Heritage Centre and the advisory bodies. And I can share with you that we have already now 177 reports which go to the next session. Sometimes the threats to World Heritage are quite severe when the conditions of a property is threatened by a danger that may result in the loss of the property's OUV. And then the committee may decide to inscribe such a property on a list of World Heritage in danger. The inclusion of a property on the danger list allows for the international community to respond to specific preservation needs in an efficient manner. Indeed, the mere prospect of inscribing a site on this list often proves to be effective and can stimulate rapid conservation action.
Stimuler une action de sauvegarde.
Specific actions to be taken to redress the situation in order to preserve the OUV and to work together towards removal of the site from the danger list. Now, management plans for each property that are prepared at the time of the nomination, normally, but we have seen also some sites which enter the list without it, but it's a clear requirement. They also require regular revision and updating, especially in living cities. The management plan must specify the OUV of a property and that it should be preserved, preferably through participatory means. The purpose of a management plan or system is to ensure the effective protection of the site for present and future generations. They may incorporate traditional practices, existing urban or regional planning instruments, or other planning control mechanisms, both formal and informal. Sustainable development principles should be integrated into the management system, and that was also made very clear through our 2015 policy for sustainable development, such as the need for impact assessment for proposed interventions. Finally, in response to pressures of rapid and inadequately controlled urbanization and urban development in and around World Heritage properties in 2011, and that came also out of the World Heritage discussions. So in 2011, UNESCO placed heritage at the core of urban management through its recommendation on the historic urban landscape, which presented for the first time cities as a combination of different historical and cultural dimensions, from tangible to intangible. At the time, it advocated for integrated management strategies beyond the heritage site that allowed for both the protection and sustainable development. I would also like to mention here that our efforts alongside our partners resulted in the integration of culture in the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the new urban agenda. Today, as cities worldwide start to plan their recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, World Heritage cities could offer important models for recovery and rebuilding processes, as well as for resilience focusing on local communities and the recovery of local practices and livelihoods. It is also a moment to address the connection of World Heritage cities with their surrounding environment, with nature and productive areas, as well as to mitigate and adapt to climate change, which is one of the most important tasks of our time. The global halt in the tourism market has given us the space to rethink the link between historic cities and their local communities and to strengthen residents' ownership of their cities, their streets, their green areas, and their public spaces. All of you here with us today are involved in the present and future of heritage practice in supporting urban World Heritage properties in each region. We actually count on you to raise awareness of urban heritage protection and the role of cultural heritage in sustainable urban development in relevant local, regional, and national policies and actions. Now it is the time for enhanced cooperation and dialogue to reassess our previous models and to plan for a better future. I would like to thank all the session leads, site managers, and participants who have joined us here today. We look very much forward to our continued collaboration to support urban areas in leveraging culture-based strategies to build cities that are stronger, more sustainable, more resilient, and more deeply linked to their histories, identities, and landscape connectivity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rossler. This was extremely useful and inspiring, because this is a great moment. I want to especially thank you for recalling some of the World Heritage processes, the tools and concepts, because I know that many of you have been working on World Heritage issues for a number of years and have worked with us in developing some of the guidance. But there are others who are joining us new for the first time and perhaps are not as familiar. So this is great that you've reviewed and recalled some of these very, very important tools. Thank you again. And I just want to mention that we're building new rules around how to interact virtually. Normally, we would have at this point had a coffee break and had a chance to get to know each other, maybe had a table ronde where everybody introduces themselves. But now we must have a virtual coffee and have instead a virtual bio profiles that we have posted on Teams. So we don't actually introduce each of you, but you have all your introductions online. So please do consult them so that each of you bring a lot of richness to this meeting, and we want that to be recognized. So it is there in your biopics, and if you have not shared your biopic, please do so. All right, so now I'm just going to go over, we have a very ambitious plan for this meeting, because we have, on the one hand, we're looking at World Heritage cities, which are living cities that cannot be treated as in isolation as large monuments, where we have to understand the urban conservation issues and see them as dynamic and changing. On the other hand, we have also the historic urban landscape recommendation, which is a very important tool and a very complex tool that we want to see how that could be used effectively for better managing urban heritage. And then we have, of course, the current situation with the COVID-19 global pandemic. And so it's really a moment where the cities are especially suffering, because they have been the epicenter of the pandemic for the most part. So this is really a moment to rethink recovery and resilience. And World Heritage cities present both opportunities and challenges, because on the one hand, yes, they're suffering very much because of the absolute halt in tourism. But on the other hand, they could also serve as very important models to other heritage cities in leading the way to recovery and rebuilding. And all of this within the larger framework of the 2030 Agenda and the New Urban Agenda. So, and we're hoping you will help us by the end of these next 4 sessions, the 5 sessions in total, that you will help us solve all our problems, and we will have a very nice list of strategies that can be very simply applied by everybody else. So let me just begin by capturing a few key points and recalling around World Heritage on urban heritage management. I hope I'm sharing the correct screen. All right, I have to go back to the top and share screen. Okay. All right, so with this, what I want to do is to very briefly capture a few points around the management of urban heritage first of all, to give you a little bit of an overview of how we are, how we've arrived at where we arrived at, where the World Heritage Convention obviously came to be in 1972. It was only in 1992 that the cultural landscape as a category, the idea of looking at the combined works of man and nature, was adopted by the committee. And then in 1994, the global strategy was adopted to have a more balanced list. In 2001, the historic Centre of Vienna was inscribed. And I mentioned this because it was particularly interesting and in some ways a turning point, because it was, as it was inscribed even, and then the subsequent year, there was the question of a development that became very key in the discussion that led in the end in 2005 to the Vienna Memorandum, which many of you are familiar with. And if you're not, you can find all of these documents online and on our website. And then eventually, that was the beginning of the workshops and the discussions, the debates around the impact and the management of urban development and how that should be integrated with the management of heritage, heritage identity and conservation. So in 2011, all the member states of UNESCO adopted the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape. And here you see the inscription of Vienna and the new structures that came about, where there was, for example, in 2002, the committee expressed a serious concern around an urban development project. It was already, even at the time of inscription, that the height and volume of the structures around needed to be reviewed and carefully protected so that there was no impact on the visual integrity of the site. I'm not being able to, okay. And then we have the historic urban landscape recommendation that I will go into a little bit more in detail. So maybe I can just skip over to save time. But it's basically that we're looking, and when you look at the historic urban landscape approach or the whole approach, we're really talking about layering and interconnection, about layering and interconnections between natural and cultural layers, tangible and intangible, international and local values that have to coexist in any World Heritage city or historic city. So these values become the starting point, the point of departure, you might say. So, for example, when you look at the city of Bordeaux, for instance, and you see the Port of the Moon, you see that there are many different elements, whether it's built and open space, the monumental with the ordinary, the water, the port, the region with the vineyards, the heights, the volumes, the management of these heights and volumes, and its setting within the valley itself, and its setting along the river, its role as a harbor that was then moved. The port itself was actually moved subsequently. So there's a number of factors that go into looking. So it's a very complex way of understanding urban heritage. Now, the threats, if I, just looking at the cities in the World Heritage Cities program and looking at and evaluating the threats to the cities from the last World Heritage Committee meeting, the State of Conservation reports and so on, we see that the maximum threat, in a sense, came from the idea of housing. And when you say threats, it means that what's endangering the OUV, and so the protection of the OUV, the management system, the management plans, the transportation issues, management activities, the lack of sufficiently strong legal frameworks, land conversion. All of these, and of course conflicts, all of these have been very major factors. But I think, especially speaking with experts, the management issues around management systems and land conversion and management plans, these are certainly something that we can collectively develop ways to address better. Just to highlight some of the key sort of, you might say, triggers for the kind of issues that we come across. One is new constructions and city landscapes. So we have, for instance, the city of the Cathedral Alcazar and the Archivo de Indias in Seville. And Seville, we find, the factors affecting it, that was in 2013, was housing and systematic management plans. And we find that in Seville, there was a proposal for a tower, a building that was obstructing the views. And so even though, the location of this tower and how it was located, beyond the property boundaries, was very much, it can be in the buffer zone and still have an impact. And I think these are really very, very key to look at. Then we have the example of Shahrisabz in Uzbekistan, for example, where we find the issue of urban renewal plans and new developments, where something is actually a planned development, but a planned development that doesn't take the OUV into consideration adequately can end up actually creating something that ends up as a large-scale demolition and rebuilding. Because there is another view which is a conflicting view of how the town should be, what it, the objectives of what it should be. So you have here, for example, the original urban fabric. This is during the intervention processes, and then how it ended up. So, this obviously the question now is not one of saying, well, which is better, because it's not, when it's a World Heritage Site, we have to look at the protection of the OUV. Another factor, for example, is the urban development and loss of traditional lifestyles, where things, there's no support anymore for the traditional lifestyles. And that means you can end up with a city that's like an empty shell, or you can end up with a city that gets cumulatively changed. So you have, for example, the Casbah of Algiers, where the changes in the traditional ways of life and knowledge systems affect it in a number of ways. And you have the erosion and deposition, you have the management activities, management plans, land conversions that happen. And you see that the Casbah is very intricate and very substantial. And finally, I want to touch on the natural hazards and the development and how that specifically impacts natural hazards. So, for example, this is the city of Grand Bassam, which was the first capital of Côte d'Ivoire, and the historic is an example of a late 19th, early 20th century colonial town planned with quarters that specialized in commerce, administration, and so on. And it had African fishing villages alongside colonial architecture. And this city suffered a flooding that happened some months ago, and has been, there's a lot of issues around managing the because obviously it's next to it. So you can see the location along the rivers, and that has had an impact in how the water is managed. The land, oftentimes the natural drainage systems are impacted. So taking that into stock becomes obviously very much part of the disaster management, you might say, prevention, disaster risk reduction in those situations. And already in 2017, the rainwater table, had been an issue, so it had already been identified. The erosion, siltation, deposition had been identified as an issue. I want to move now to very quickly capture a few points around an expert workshop that we had some months ago. That was in January, thanks to the Japanese, the government of Japan, where the experts who and you can find all of this on our website. The documents, the outcome documents are on the website. But I just want to share with you three fairly useful things that came out of it. One is a set of key recommendations which are thematic. Linked to this is a set of attributes of urban heritage identity. And then the third is a methodology for implementing the historic urban landscape recommendation. So just to go over, I know these look like scary looking tables, but I thought it was best to just put them up so you have an idea, and you can always find them. You don't have to worry about taking anything down. The PPTs will be online on Teams, and then the documents, of course, are online, so you can find all the material. And this is you might say, a reduced version of it, so you'll find the full version of it online. So the key recommendations and the key issues really were identified as governance. So establishing a single authority with a clear accountability to promote the establishment, which is cross-sectoral, having intersectoral governance structures, is really seen as a key effort. Second was the integration into urban processes, so that the management plans have to be integrated, the heritage management plans, with the future city development master plans, because in most cities these are happening parallelly. You have the team that's working on the conservation, and then you have the team that's working on the urban development, and the two never talk to each other, which means that the one, the decisions of one are not being communicated to the other and are not being integrated. And so the urban development plans then at some point when they're implemented, we find are in conflict with the heritage management and vice versa. So, and then the wider heritage values, which is where we're talking about this list of attributes of urban heritage identity that need to be taken into account. And that also includes the intangible cultural heritage and inventories of intangible cultural heritage that should be undertaken within the cities also, so that the associated intangible heritage values can be seen as part of the identity of the place. And then the management, so what we're saying then is that these wider values are in addition to the OUV. So there is the OUV, and then there is the additional, the other points that are added on. Then we have the thematic recommendations. Continuing on it, we have the connection to the 2030 Agenda and the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy. We have the regulatory mechanisms, the connections to the 2030 Agenda and the World Heritage Urban Development Policy, of course, happens at many different levels. The regulatory mechanisms is very key because we can talk about the mechanisms being specific to a local context. We can also talk about it being specific to property boundaries and different in the buffer zone. And also there can be additional guidance for the new development that can be put in place so that whatever new properties come up, new developments come up, are in line with the OUV and support and don't deter from the OUV. Then the financial and other mechanisms is something else that we talked about, which is to do with the funding and the tax incentives or other types of incentives and awards. Capacity development for all stakeholders and in a variety of different directions. The preparation of nomination dossiers, which already includes, so even before a site goes is actually nominated and inscribed, the idea of this intersectoral governance mechanisms could be taken into account, because that's one of the very key issues, is how the governance is managed. And then the monitoring, of course, and the impacts of urbanization, informing, of course, the World Heritage Committee on the urbanization pressures is something that has been happening actually for the last few years. But furthermore, in the periodic reporting, in the implementation or through the implementation of the Culture 2030 indicators, which have been recently developed by UNESCO, spatial satellite monitoring and sharing information on development projects, as Dr. Rossler pointed out, even prior to any new developments being undertaken, they should be informed to the World Heritage Center. The impact assessment is another very important tool here, an impact assessment for urban heritage, for the impacts of new developments on urban heritage, identity, the OUV, and there's a variety, and this is something that's also ongoing with ICROM and IUCN and ICOMOS that we are working on from the World Heritage Center all together with our advisory bodies, and the advocacy and exchange, where there's a structured mechanism. These were the recommendations. I'm not again going to go into the details of this because you can find all of this in the outcomes, but I just want to touch on the idea of what we mean by attributes of urban heritage identity. So the OUV the OUV is based on specific criteria. There clear delineation of what it is the site is inscribed for, which is obviously something that is important to the entire world, not just to that place. But there are also certain local attributes, which is what we put here as attributes of urban heritage identity, which are particularly important for managing new development around, or changes to manage change. So when you can look at it in terms of scale, especially for urban areas. One of the key things is to not just look at it at any one scale, but at multiple scales. So you have the wider context. So you look at the skylines, the valleys, hills, natural features, views and vistas, and so on. You have the urban elements. So you have like the axes, the city walls, streetscapes, street sections, markets, the densities, the heights. It can also include the groups, the local community groups, the social inclusion aspects, their economic activities. So there can be physical and non-physical elements to it, the flora and fauna that is there, the infrastructure, the land use pattern, all of this at the urban level. And then you have the monument or building level, where you're looking again at the scale, the materials, the building techniques, maybe the building materials, the form, the plot setbacks, the colors, textures, maybe certain types of embellishments that are typical of a particular period, of a region. And then the elements of intangible cultural heritage, the festivals, dance, music, other practices, the spatial practices. This is the city of Santiago de Compostela in Spain, and it's just here to sort of recall how we have these sort of elements at different scales, different levels that we need to look at in order to be able to manage the identity at this urban scale. So obviously we're looking at the way the hills are, the monuments, the heights of the monument in relation to the surroundings, the green areas that are around. And that's what allows that allows us to appreciate what this city was inscribed for. And then sometimes when you have new developments, even within the property or very close to the property boundaries, the impact that this has, as for instance here in the Acropolis of Athens, we see the museum, the new museum. What is the relationship of this new intervention with the existing, and how can it be designed in such a way that it doesn't impact negatively or deter in any way visually or otherwise. So in terms of implementing the methodology for the historic urban landscape recommendation, it goes back very much following the recommendations that we just discussed, but recalling at the same time the 4 key tools. And again, we find this table much more filled out in the outcome document, but the 4 key tools that are listed in the text of the historic urban landscape recommendation are civic engagement tools, knowledge and planning tools, regulatory systems, and financial mechanisms. We didn't really go into the financial mechanisms. That's something we will have to do at another meeting, but this is really a beginning. I mean, this is a methodology that will be developed more and more as we go further, but this is a start where we say the steps to implementing the historic urban landscape is first and foremost to establish a governance structure for the World Heritage. So that becomes the first step, in a sense, where there's a coordination role. The second is to assess the development needs, to assess its status, the sustainable development status, needs, priorities, maybe implement the Culture 2030 indicators to assess the conditions of sustainable development, and reach consensus with stakeholders on sustainable development needs and priorities in the place. And then move to mapping and survey documentation, to be able to really have a clear documentation of tangible and intangible and natural resources, and develop the attributes of urban heritage identity, as well as a brief description of local significance, because sometimes there's also local historical significance of places that is important to note, so that when you have new developments, these will help the establishment of building guidelines, for example, or to establish changes in land use. And then the next is to assess vulnerabilities, which is to the vulnerabilities to the protection of the OUV, so that the attributes of heritage identity and the attributes of urban heritage identity in relation to change, both in terms of socioeconomic stresses, the impacts of climate change, as well as building new developments. We look at then the integration and coherence, which is integrating the attributes of OUV and the attributes of urban heritage identity into development plans and processes, and ensuring that the OUV and other urban heritage values are recognized in the design and development programs. Then we have priority actions and projects which are delineated, and certain impact assessments are carried out. So it's a proactive way, rather than waiting for random projects to come about, to really prioritize actions and say what are the types of projects that we want to have happen, and then say, well, how can we have them happen, carry out impact assessments for them, and then have them, and that way sort of manage the change in a more proactive way. Partnerships for local management, establishing partnerships and champions, it's very, very key to each of the identified actions of conservation and sustainable development, to look at both public, private sector actors, look at local communities and engaging them throughout. Establishing innovative financial mechanisms is very much part of it. And finally, capacity reinforcement across a range of different types. When we say capacity, it often, is sort of a bucket, and that bucket has lots of different types of things, from, even to be able to have community engagement. It requires a certain methodology and being able to build the capacities for engagement. So there's every type of capacity and awareness building that needs to be undertaken. As I just sign off, I just want to be able to touch upon a couple of other resources that you may like to consult. The World Heritage Cities Program, which is one of the website of that in our UNESCO World Heritage Center website, where it's one of the 6 thematic programs that's formally approved and monitored by the World Heritage Committee. You'll find the document New Life for Historic Cities. The New Urban Agenda, of course, is very key, because this is something that we contributed to, and culture is very much present in the New Urban Agenda. The Culture Urban Future document, which is the first global report on culture for sustainable development, sustainable urban development, that was published and launched at the Quito Habitat 3. And finally, the thematic indicators for culture in the 2030 Agenda, which is a way also to measure culture's role at the urban and at the national level. So with that, I'm going to stop now, and thank you very much for your kind attention. I have to stop sharing screen and come back to you. And now it is my very great pleasure to move right on to the discussion of the key points for today, when we're talking about well-being and local communities. To move now to request Yukio Nishimura and Shadia Touqan, who are the session leads for this, to take over the floor. So I think first we have Shadia speaking first. So may I invite you, Shadia, to please join us, and thank you again very much.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, if I may, I realized that I didn't make one small announcement, which is that because we have so much information that is being exchanged in a short space of time, we have requested some participants to serve as rapporteurs to help us take some notes. And I want to thank Parastu Eshrati, very kindly agreed to take notes for us for today. So we'll share these notes also at the end of the session. We'll put them up on Teams.
Thank you so much. I would like first to thank the World Heritage City Program for inviting us and for arranging this very appropriate moment, this meeting. And I think we are at a point where there are so many challenges and so many issues we have to deal with. And as I am now on the second session, I would say that there was a lot of issues related to the role of community that was discussed in the opening session last Wednesday, which really brings back in focus the role of the community as a glue to what could happen and how we can protect the lives of people living in historic urban centers. So I think I will have a presentation now, or do you want me to just, yeah, okay. Well, right, just a minute, I can't seem to work this. I can't get the second page. I thought.
I think that it was being managed by Alba.
By Alba, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So I will try to be quick because we have little time. So I would just go for the background that you can see now that the cities in history were planned to provide shelter, education, commerce, and religious, social, and cultural activities, and held a social economic mix of the population. It still remains the same now. If you live in Cairo, or you live in Jerusalem, or live in Fez, it is basically the same thing, although time has changed the physical aspect. Some of them are well preserved, some of them still lacking a lot of physical work and maintenance and so on. I'll go to the second.
Please advance, Alba.
Right. So the key messages we will be discussing today is we look at historic cities that provide different functions and services for their communities and continue to do so. Many of them have changed hands. Many of the demography has changed over time, and because they are living cities, it just changes with economic situation, with social new trends, and people wanting to live in modern cities, and then poorer people move in, and then the whole structure and of the social structure of the cities, it changes in terms of the residents. But many of them, like if we go to the city of Jerusalem or city of Nablus or Fez or Tunis, you still have the residential, you still have the commercial, you still have cultural activities, you still have religious centers and so on. What we're trying to do is to go back to the recommendation on the Hull recommendation 2011, which focuses on the quality of the human environment, including production, uses, dynamism. And I would particularly want to refer to the civic management tools. Can I change, please? So, and the second one, please. I just want to move. Can I have the next page, please? So the recommendation of Hull and the subsequent discussions and meetings and recommendations and declarations and so on still include local, national, regional, international, public and private actors in the urban development process. The approach also focuses on preserving the quality of human environment, enhancing the productive and sustainable use of urban spaces while recognizing their dynamic character and promoting social and functional diversity. Next, yes. I would just like to move to the civic engagement tools, which points out that these should involve a diverse cross-section of stakeholders and empower them to identify key values in their urban areas, develop visions that reflect their diversity, set goals, and agree on actions to safeguard their heritage and promote sustainable development. These tools, which constitute an integral part of urban governance dynamics, should facilitate intercultural dialogue by learning from the communities about their histories, their tradition, their values, their needs and aspirations. I would add that in reality, if you live or work in an old city, you can see the dynamics. You can see people understand their environment, understand their needs, rather than waiting for a top-down approach where people tell them how they should live and what they should do and how they could change the character of their environment, particularly houses or the commercial areas and so on. Please. So now we are facing a lot of challenges, and the local communities living in urban historic centers has suffered most than the rest of the communities in any city because of the social and economic consequences of the destruction of their cities, either as a result of natural or man-made disaster, i.e. Conflicts and health and deadly diseases and pandemics, as we are witnessing now. So the recognition increased lately among international, national, and local stakeholders of the impact of these disasters on the communities. Some would argue that their response did not go far enough, and sometimes I agree with that, while many would consider that the impact of communities in historic urban areas was neither realized nor considered, or it should be looked at in a different way. So what we heard on Wednesday, how the community dealt with the crisis, from Brasilia to Venice to in Africa and other countries, the community took over in Tunisia. People started to rely on their own resources to resolve their problems using digital channels, using their streetwise methods, how they respond to catastrophes, how they get together and try to help each other. So the question here, we have two questions to look at. In response to the recommendations, we need to identify who from the stakeholders, when we talk about them in theoretical terms, when we try to apply the conventions and the charters and the laws, who should be involved in identifying the key values that are important to the community in the historic areas. These are special people and special community, and as we have seen, now they are standing together and helping out within their community and outside. So how representative, if we say we are now involving participation of local councillors and mayors, and we heard very, very forceful and strong statements from mayors who were speaking on Wednesday, because they went back to the basics to see what their community needs and what their community is doing at the time of crisis. So we want to see whether we just stop by involving executives and officials in the participation process, and how representative are these of the community, the residents, small businesses, service providers, labor, students, and sometimes beyond the borders of the old city, because the old city is not an island. It is used by the community from outside. I mean, I come from an old city in Palestine, Nablus, and the best market is the old city market. And people come from different neighborhoods, much posh, more posh and maybe affluent areas, but they do their shopping in the old city, and they regard it as the major asset of the city. So in terms of the urban government dynamics, who from the communities we're talking about should be involved to facilitate the, I lost the page, can I have the next page? Alba, please. So who should we involve? I mean, how can we engage with the communities? Do we as was suggested in Italy, I'm trying to remember the city, that they have their own platform now, where everybody, either through the internet or through meetings and so on, to develop their own platform to say what is it really they need for their cities. And I think this is something which is supported even by the local and the central government. The other question of concerning the well-being of local communities is, has the current conventions and charters and subsequent discussions went down to the level of the community, the man in the street, the family living in almost squalor behind a beautiful facade in the old city of Jerusalem or Nablus or Damascus or Cairo. How do we get to that level? And who should be the joint kind of liaison between the decision makers or the international organizations with their laws and need to protect the heritage? How do we reach that level? Is this too impractical? Or, as we can see now in the current crisis, they are the actors, they are the real actors. They kept their cities alive, and they protected each other in spite of the lack of social distancing, because they all live very close to each other, and it's usually dense population. So while the historic cores are recognized as the drivers of economic growth, main attraction to tourism and the related activities, however, in the aftermath of natural post-conflict and health disasters, what happens to the population in the historic cities from the upper point of view? Who is going to plan to provide temporary provision of shelter? How do you change the economy so you can create jobs that are feasible now at this day and age? Do you retrain people? Do you revive certain traditional skills and so on? I don't want to go more on the COVID-19 because my colleague will be covering more of that, but it's in the aftermath. We want to look at the economies that was the main solid base in the world. Like the big economies have been now gone in kind of a moment where they really cannot even assess how bad the situation would be. And major employers are releasing millions of their employees. What do we do now in the city centers, in the less affluent in our society? They will be hit harder when the dust settles down. Do we have the skills, or do we have the flexibility and resilience to rethink again? We have an opportunity now, and we heard that from a number of the speakers on Wednesday, where they say it's a moment of truth where we have to stand now and say the new normal, it will be not at all like the old normal. And we have to accept that we have been given this chance to rethink and redesign and restructure even our economies. For the short term, obviously tourism is not going to be, and that is probably, as we heard, is a good thing for the time being. Some people in Venice started to be able to go and visit their museums because it's been there. The museums and the touristic sites have been hijacked from the original residents. So how can we engage the residents in rethinking and replanning with us, the so-called planners or professionals? What is it they need? Do you want to go to a city where you can have for tourist attraction, you will have these coffee shops and bistros and so on, or do you really would like to go to a city where you can eat local food and look at local traditional dances and cultural local issues, or do you want to have historic cities which are very similar to what you see all over the world in the airports? It's different. So it is a time to think more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shadia. That was really wonderful. Yukio, may I invite you to please?
Okay, thank you. Can you see the PowerPoint? This is Yukio Nishimura. Good evening from Tokyo. Following the Shadia's presentation, I will focus further on the current situation. Last Wednesday, we have a lot of the problems after the COVID-19 global epidemic. And at least I have several lessons learned from the voice of mayors and experts. One is the culture can be play as a bond of resilience, because the local community can share the deep-rooted heritage among themselves. So this is the bond can be a bond. And in particular, intangible heritage can be a bond of solidarity, because the intangible heritage shared by the community, this is a kind of the collective memory of the heritage. So we can rely on the intangible heritage to part of the resilience and solidarity. This is a very good lesson that the heritage we are dealing with have a power to rebond ourselves. However, there are some anxiety or some worries, because that some mayors said local communities heavily dependent on tourism may lose diversity, because they sometimes meet tourist expectation, become very stereotype, superficial expectation to modify themselves, their own heritage. So this is not a good way. And this COVID-19 pandemic suddenly gives us some sort of opportunity to reshape the tourism to avoid such mistake. So we can build back the society better, not to reconstruct as it was, as Shadia mentioned before. This is idea that in 2011, eastern shore of Japan was attacked by earthquake and tsunami, and the main motto to reconstruction of the city is the building back better, not building back as it was, because the city, as you know, that is a living mechanism. So we can make it better to avoid such mistakes. So this can be a very good opportunity to make it better. And these are the 4 questions we together with Shadia, will cast on you for the discussion. First 2 is now made by the presentation by Shadia Touqan, and I will concentrate on the 3rd and 4th question. The third one is how COVID-19 affects local communities. Of course, there is a very strong connotation of the economic impact, but at the same time, we have the social impact on local community. And each local community have the different, say, economic situation compared with others. So we cannot say the same. So I think this is one thing. So and also the role of tourism can be played in different way in different communities. So we cannot say that the tourism as a whole to think for the reshape of the heritage management. And at the same time, local communities are always regarded as a custodian of heritage. This is really true, but after this pandemic, this sort of the formation still true to us all, or we need to think other players to come together. This is another question. And as I mentioned, that this is a good opportunity to reshape the tourism. Most of the World Heritage City is heavily rely on the international tourism, but now that the international travel was banned, so we gradually have to shift to the local tourism. And this is a good opportunity to think our local value to the local tourist, and to rethink our heritage to share with the visitors. And maybe we organize and make the expectation higher for the local tourists. And so it may lead us to reshaping the local communities. If it is possible, maybe we can make it as a opportunity rather than challenges. This is the third question. And fourth question is, can we make opportunities of the current situation, as I mentioned? So redefine the role of heritage in the life of the communities. So of course, it is identity on economic sources, but also at the same time, it is a social tie, and also the bond for resilience, as the mayor mentioned. So the role of the heritage is much wider. So we can redefine the role of heritage. And the second one is redefine the identity of the local communities. So 70 to 80% of World Heritage cities are rely on the tourism, but what kind of tourism, or rather than tourism, we need to see some possibility for our community to survive for the next generation. So it leads to the local economy restructuring, and the community, each community has a different agenda, and also their relationship between the tourism is slightly different from community to community. So maybe the relationship between communities may change, may make it better. And so we will make entering the new paradigm of the community and after this corona pandemic. And also we may invite new interest group for our heritage of each heritage city, because many people from outside with some sort of they need to share the interest by remote works, or support the heritage city with many different kinds of the work, not just physically visiting the site, but they had some sort of connection or sharing the heritage even though they are staying in their home, they can share the heritage of the certain city by having the local product, by sharing or giving some idea, sharing the ideas. So this is a kind of the new type of tourism. So we can expand the idea of tourism to make a connection with the many people who are interested in their own our heritage in some different parts of the world. So I think we can make this pandemic an opportunity to create building back better. This is my presentation. Thank you. Back to Jyoti.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shadia and Yukio. You've raised some really important points. I just want to say that you're leading the session, but I'm just helping manage the floor. So thank you very much for raising these questions. I'd like now to move to 2 case studies from 2 site managers of very interesting work that you're doing in your cities and very skilled site managers that we're very delighted to have. So first, let me invite Ming Chee, the General Manager of Georgetown World Heritage. Ming Chee, over to you.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm now sharing with you my slides. I'm Ming Chee. Most of my colleagues call me Ang. And I'm a site manager. So over here, I would like to share with you some of our experience from Georgetown, Malaysia. We are in the State Bank. How do we work together with the local communities during this COVID-19 and in also taking care of the well-being of our site and our people? So I have shared the information sheets of my site. And mainly today, I'm going to cover only the part on Georgetown, although the site, we share with Malacca and Georgetown, but the presentation will be mainly on Georgetown today. As you can see from the pictures, it briefly talk about our OUV. That is, we talk about the the multicultural trading towns, and we are also the living testimony of a lot of living heritage, as well as we have a very beautiful townscape. Just a very basic information. The site is about 109 hectares of the properties with 150 hectares of a buffer zone. And we have around 5,000 buildings with more than 3,000 of them are categorized with cultural heritage values. Every day, we see people residents living in the site. We see people like myself who don't live in the site, but I commute and go into the site to work. And we see people who go to the site to buy food, to pray, or just to visit a friend. So it's a very dynamic site. But as you can see in the photos over here, before COVID-19, you can see on the upper photos you see a lot of people doing their daily activities. However, when we enter into COVID-19 and the government of Malaysia, in order to control and curb with the virus, the movement control order was imposed. So it's a semi-lockdown, and people stay home, see bird, cat, and dogs on the streets, and the site manager also. So we have to, when we try to understand the well-being, we have to talk about resiliencies. Georgetown, I work together with more than 30 of my colleagues in Georgetown World Heritage Incorporated. We build and understand heritage attributes at risk together with the local community. We have to identify the most vulnerable group and find the resources and to provide it at the right time. In particular, at the very beginning of the COVID-19, I think that is around March and April, the risk is very, but now when we are entering into June and July, we start to see the impact to income, to confidence, to the psychological and physical health is impacting everyone, be it within the workplace side or outside of the workplace side. Every day, my office has now resumed work fully. We see a lot of conversations, worries about income by the people who live in the site, by the people who own businesses in the site, be it they serve the tourism sector, cultural sector, or business sector. Everyone is impacted. So it is very important through our daily routine to listen to the people, to listen to the local communities, and also to talk to them and encourage to understand what is going on now in their life. And most importantly, I think in building of resiliencies, we have to understand the most beautiful about humanity is we are able to adapt and adopt. So I would like to bring it to my second presentation. In the photos over here, you see a shops that is in yellow and green color and a lot of Grab food. I believe you know that is the food delivery companies. I took this photo in around March when our country is under lockdown, and the restaurants are about to open. This particular shop is very old, and they are able to pick up the e-platforms and they are able to continue their sales throughout the control order. So we see creativity from the local communities to find accessibility to information, and they use different methods, formal or informal, to communicate with their customer, to communicate with the other stakeholders. And then there's also where site managers can play a very important role to be the bridge for, in particular, the group of local communities who are maybe need a bit of push, a little bit of encouragement and confidence for them to go further. In our office in Georgetown, currently, we have picked up the strategies by adapting to our current resources, to our current staff, to our current projects, and how to adapt what we have in order to help the local communities to transiting safely into the new normal under COVID-19. We have innovated a few problem-solving solutions. That's how I want to call it. We plan to launch it, I think it will be early July, targeting each of our OUV by providing incentive and solutions. So we wanted to create long-term strategies that is most sustainable for our cities. As rightly mentioned by the speakers before me, we need to do things more sustainable. Now is the opportunity. Tourism is a big part for Georgetown. The government has now changed their target into local tourism. Local means people from other parts of Penang are coming in to Georgetown and appreciate the cultural heritage that we have. I think that is the right strategies, and we should encourage more sites to do so. And most importantly, we need to empower our local community with technologies. They have to be tech savvy. Able to use a mobile phone doesn't mean that you are tech savvy. Our team will be communicating with our local communities here and work with them. I don't want to use the word help them, but work with them to go into the next chapter of how do we safeguard, conserve, and promote cultural heritage on the e-platform. That can be one of the platforms will complement the challenges that we are having. The third slide that I have over here, the pictures on a very beautiful door of one of our cultural heritage building. You will be able to see that people have to close.
Could I ask you to move a little quickly? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The attitude that we have, I think, is important that we take not only try to solve problem, but it's important to take care of the dignity of the professionals and also the custodian. We need a lot of political view, and of course we have to keep optimistic and find hope in the step-by-step approach that we are doing. So please don't work alone. There's a lot of people who share the frustration, but the efforts over here. And I think I would like to end my presentation by saying this. The new normal that we are having now, in the COVID-19 world, it might be physical distancing, but we should socially engaging each other. So I have here 2 questions that I have posted. And I ask it from the site manager's perspective. It's important to stay in touch with the local committee. However, the pro and cons of sharing your personal phone number with the local committees in your site. So I hope you can think about it. Number 2 is that resources are always scarce. So it's important to prioritize who among the local committees should receiving these resources. So do you have a list of priority for your site? With this, thank you very much. Thank you, the program, for inviting me.
Thank you very much. That was really very, very, very interesting. Now I'm going to request Carlo Francini, who's the site manager and head of the Florence World Heritage UNESCO Relationship Office of the Municipality of Florence. Carlo, please.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh my God. Last. Okay. The first. Okay. Good afternoon from Italy. Good afternoon. And thank you very much for this great opportunity. I'm very honored to represent my city and the historic Centre of Florence during this important online meeting. I am Carlo Francini, site manager of the World Heritage Site, the Historic Centre of Florence, and the head of the Office Florence World Heritage and Relationship with UNESCO of the Municipality of Florence. I would also like to take this opportunity to bring the greetings of the Mayor of Florence, Mr. Dario Nardella, who greatly thanks UNESCO for the attention which is dedicating to these important themes that have been affecting our common heritage. Today, I am going to point out a very particular aspect of the Historic Centre of Florence, which is common to several World Heritage sites worldwide: green areas and landscape, which relationship contribute to the community well-being. In fact, the green areas inside and around our cities are an important aspect which contribute to health, security, and psychophysical well-being of people. Florence has always been renowned for being the cradle of the symbol of the Renaissance, as well as for its extraordinary artistic activity over the centuries, its monuments and museums. Florence can be essentially perceived as a stone city made of monumental buildings. According to some analysis of the University of Florence, there are around 380 gardens and parks within the historic Centre of Florence, as you can see in the green spot in the picture, this picture. The problem is that the historic center is scattered by several gardens belonging to private palaces, but there are just few accessible public green areas. In this context, there is also a difficulty in communication given by the many stakeholders and the authorities which manage the different green areas. Moreover, the emergency given by COVID-19 highlighted the need and the urge of citizens to access and to live these green areas. Right now, our main concern is to help the local community, both residents and city users of the historic center, to live green spaces in order to ensure their well-being. The reopening phase of the cultural institutions in our city has shed light on the greater success of park and gardens, such as the Boboli Garden, in visitor number compared to museums. Our contribution to this topic is the project Florence Greenway. The Greenway project tried to unify 3 separate itineraries, as shown in this picture, passing through gardens inside the World Heritage Site, which connects gardens and monuments of great cultural significance, such as Bardini Museum, the Bardini Villa and Garden, the Belvedere Fortress, and the Boboli Garden. The Oltrarno area in Florence provides green itineraries, the Greenway, which connect 2 World Heritage Sites, the Historic Centre of Florence and the Medici Villas and Gardens in Tuscany, conference parks involved, Villa di Poggio Imperiale and Boboli Garden here. This project wants to raise awareness about this unique itinerary, which enhances the landscape and the hillside of Oltrarno district. The Oltrarno district is the south part of the southern area of the World Heritage Site. The Greenway is a 15-kilometer cultural itinerary in the Oltrarno area within the World Heritage Site. The project begins with the drafting of a master plan of the Greenway, which includes the Viale dei Colli, the ramps, and the Bobolino Garden. The project includes maintenance and restoration activities, the creation of a specific signage system, and the production of information tools. The Greenway project has been inserted within the management plan of the Historic Centre of Florence under the macro area management of tourist system. This project, as the other projects in management plan, has been related to the Sustainable Development Goals number 8, 11, 12, and 17. In the next months, we plan to implement even more the project and to expand the itinerary in the Viale dei Colli. Viale dei Colli is the Florentine road system which crosses the hills that surround the Oltrarno area. In this light, in the future, we will plan a raising awareness campaign about this important green itinerary in the historic center. Also has an effort to strengthen the significance of the landscape surrounding the city of Florence in the context of the historic urban landscape approach. In this context, I would like to share with you a beautiful image elaborated by the students of the Landscape Laboratory of the Department of Architecture of the University of Florence. This clearly outlines the green areas in the Oltrarno district. The University of Florence and our co-joint laboratory, Heritage and Research Lab, will increasingly focus their work on landscape theme and on the study and implementation of the Greenway itinerary as a strategic action of the Historic Centre of Florence in the next update of the management plan. This year, we have submitted a proposal for a minor boundary modification, which slightly enlarges the perimeter of the World Heritage Site, including important green itineraries in the Oltrarno area. The religious complex of San Miniato al Monte is mentioned within the criteria of the Statement of the Outstanding Universal Value. At the time of the inscription of Florence in the World Heritage List in 1982, the abbey was erroneously not included within the map of the core zone. Therefore, the proposal of minor boundary modification has the aim of inserting the complex and the greenery area of important cultural and naturalistic value within the core zone. In this last slide, I would like to share with you some questions which are important for us regarding the well-being and the local community. The first question is, how can we integrate the concept of well-being with the heritage management? And the second question is, how can the site manager choose and adopt strategies to enhance local community engagement in order to raise awareness about the value of cultural heritage as an essential element of well-being? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Carlo. This was extremely enriching. That was really phenomenal. All right, well, we have a lot of very interesting questions on the table. We have the questions from Shadia and Yukio. We have the questions and the examples of the types of very different types of efforts in Georgetown and Florence. And each of you have the places that you're working in that you may have other experiences and views on. So please, now the floor is open. I request you to please post your questions in the chat, raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, and we call on you to speak as you are able and as you would like to intervene. But we want to hear from all of you, or as many of you as possible. All right, I see Eduardo's hand first. So let's start with that.
Okay.
And meanwhile, I hope others will start lining up your hands.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to make 2 points because this is a very exciting discussion and presentations were excitingly motivating. There are 2 things in the relationship between the community and the site, which has been emphasized all the time, and the need to incorporate the communities into the decision-making process. I want to point out that one of the major difficulties that we have found on that process comes from the way the decision-making process is organized in many countries. It's run by cultural institutions that have the connection with UNESCO, and they're mostly run by national governments that have the connection with the World Heritage Center. And the decision-making process is top-down, literally, and certainly mostly imposed on the communities. So this is a major failure of the process because it really blocks the communities from engaging from the very beginning. They hardly ever consulted or asked whether to nominate the place, or asked to. So this is one of the major issues we need to address. And I think that is very correct what you're saying, that we need to incorporate the management of the historic centers into the management of the cities. It's the only way that they can be connected. It cannot be run by parallel bureaucratic structures, one dealing with culture, the other one dealing with the city. That's the source of all conflict. The second point is that when we talk about the community and the local community, this is a very varied lot. In general, we tend to subsume everything under stakeholders. In fact, this is we have to be more careful about that because we have all kind of people or communities and groups inside. And so I would rather talk about interest holders first, and then we can identify the type of interest that they have. So just give you a little example. If someone owns property on an historic center, it can be easily be called a shareholder because they have a share in the value of the property, if you want. That's one element that will immediately distinguish from, for instance, a tourist, which is someone that will go visit the place for a very short time and then get totally disconnected with the place. And we need to talk about the tourists probably as space holders. They hold the space for a while and then go. The level of commitment, the level of depth of their interest on the sites are entirely different. So unless we work more carefully about how to talk, how to engage, and who to engage in the process, we are going to be always working with this vague idea of stakeholders, which encompass so many different persons. So those are the 2 comments I want to make for the discussion further on. How can we fine-tune all the discussion about who holds interest in the city? And secondly, can we merge the cultural and the city planning sites into one conceptual framework and institutional framework. I think it's possible. There are 3 or 4 cities that I know that have done that, and it works. However, it takes tremendous levels of, I would say, honesty and being very, very generosity on the part of institutions that have been running this connection with the World Heritage so tightly from the central government, so close to them, and particularly from the cultural elites who have been the driving force behind these nominations. They had to give up. I mean, it's no longer their preserve, is the preserve of everybody, and that's a significant change in frame, which I think the historic urban landscape approach is banging in our heads for almost, now almost 20 years or whatever, or 10 years, and we have not learned the lesson. I mean, incorporating the urban landscape approach into the management historic center is a huge institutional task because it really encompasses everything, and we need to bring them into the management of the city. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. I see one hand up, Benedetta Ubertazzi. You'll have to forgive me and teach me how to say your names correctly if I mispronounce them, which I probably am. Benedetta, please go ahead. Benedetta? We don't hear you. No. Okay, we come back to you. Maybe meanwhile we ask Daniele. Daniele, you have your hand up. Daniele Pini, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Benedetta,
Okay.
we come back to you.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I found this session very, very interesting and inspiring. And I would like to give some comments to the Shadia Touqan speech, which I perfectly understood. But I think that her intervention was very much related to some specific urban realities, which I know a little bit, so I understand her very well. And I take her point, which is very important, that for the well-being of the community, it is important, it is a priority to understand how our conservation policy can benefit the poorer population of the historic cities. Historic cities in Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, and so on are mostly inhabited by a very poor population, and the concern of Shadia is absolutely a priority. But if I compare this reality to other realities I live and I know, the situation is totally different, absolutely different. I mean, I heard talking about Venice. Well, my question is, what is the community in Venice? Venice has lost 2/3 of the population in the last 50 years. It is inhabited only by elderly people who has a pension or, has other source of income. Tourism economy has completely emptied the social fabric of the city, and this is a very important issue. And maybe if we are talking of the community who should take care of Venice, we should think of a much wider community, which is not the community of the residents. But the same is also in other cities. Well, maybe Carlo Francini can say something about Florence, where as far as I know, there is a similar process going on. In many European cities, the community, in reality, the community in the living in the historic city is very limited, and it do not represent really the world of the city users, of the population who use and live and works in these cities. So this is one issue. A second issue, very important one, is that in any case, historic cities are no longer cities in themselves, but are only a part of a much larger, much wider urban reality or metropolitan reality. And their functions very often are not completely the functions of a city in the full sense, but are very more and more specialized. So I think that when we are talking of community well-being, we have to take into consideration these 2 points, that maybe the community is not strictly the community who lives in the city, but is a wider community, and we have to understand which one. And second, that the functions and the role of these cities have to be understood in the framework of a much wider geographic, urban, metropolitan reality. And I think that from this point of view, whole recommendation can be very important, because it provides more than tools, approaches, to address this reality, which is which is new, which has been changing very rapidly in the last few decades, and that needs to be understood case by case in the different realities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Lasana and from, I'm just looking at the list here, Buto Gozi Nyati. And then we come back, and then Rami Daher, I think, was looking to speak as well. But let me check with Benedetta first. So first Benedetta, then Lasana. Benedetta, are you able to speak now? Benedetta? Benedetta, are you able to speak?
Yes, do you hear me like this?
Yes, very good. Please go ahead.
Okay, great.
Please go ahead. Benedetta, please go ahead. Benedetta, we don't hear you. Okay, we come back to you. Lasana, please go ahead. Lasana Sisse.
Oui, merci Jyoti. En fait, je n'ai pas demandé la parole, mais je vais en profiter quand même pour poser une question aux différents intervenants, notamment les gestionnaires des sites. Bon, en parlant de communautés locales, il s'agit de qui? Ça, c'est très important de savoir. Communautés locales qui vivent dans les périmètres classés ou communautés locales des villes entières?
OK.
C'est ma question.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup. We collect a few questions and then come back to the participants, to the speakers who were presenting. We have Adnan, and we have, I'm losing my list here, Buto first. Buto Gozi Nyati, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I will just read the question which I put in the chat box, and yes. I'm directing this to the site manager at Georgetown to say, in the Georgetown context, how do they define local community? And having defined local community, what are some of the practical mechanisms that are used in the Georgetown context to engage those clearly defined communities? That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Benedetta, are you able to speak now?
Yes, do you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, yes, fine. Sorry, there was a problem with the audio in my computer. Okay, so good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening. It is a very interesting debate and workshop. I am a UNESCO facilitator for the Global Capacity Building Program on Intangible Cultural Heritage. And I just wanted to share my insight on the notion of communities. For instance, as you may know, in living heritage and intangible cultural heritage, this is at the core of the debate, because at the core of the safeguarding process is the community. So we have to understand what is the community, who is the community, and this is one of the most difficult questions, and I think there is not a single reply. to this. We usually use to facilitate our community's workshop a multi-circle graphic saying, for instance, I can give you a concrete example. The violin makers in Cremona, I don't know if you know, but the Cremona city was very much affected by the pandemic. I'm living in Milan personally, but Cremona is in Lombardy, like Milan, and both towns were completely affected by the pandemic, at the center of the pandemic, I would say. So the community is comprised of the violin makers. So the violin makers are the first circle of the graphic. The second circle of the graphic are the musicians that play the violins. And the element inscribed in UNESCO is violin making in Cremona. So the first circle is violin makers, but the community includes also the second circle. And the second circle, as I said, is musicians. The third circle is also part of the community. And the third circle is, for instance, including citizens, tourists, all other stakeholders that may be interested in visiting the violin makers, in buying violins from the violin makers. So it is a circle that may include a big number of people that are not, strictly speaking, the bearers of the element. So what is the community is very complex to understand. I just wanted to say also that I like very much in this debate and in this workshop the intersectoral attitude that we are using today. I think that it is very important to keep going on that. So for instance, I made a research on creative cities and ICH, and there are several intangible cultural heritage communities and elements that are linked to a city that is also a creative city, UNESCO creative city, and however this interrelationship is not highlighted, which is really strange. For instance, Sevilla, okay, I give you an example, this may be Sevilla, or there are many others. Sometimes it is highlighted the interrelationship between being both at the same time an intangible cultural heritage element and the creative cities, and sometimes is not. So I like very much that now this workshop and the World Heritage Community, so to say, is encouraging discussion on ICH as well and creative cities. And I think that we should keep going on that towards sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now want to invite Adnan, and then we go back to the participants and then come back to the speakers and then come back for additional questions. Adnan, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Adnan.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour cet atelier. Il y a des choses vraiment très enrichissantes et très intéressantes. J'ai voulu juste parler d'un fait dans notre manière, et je prends le cas de nos pays, la Tunisie en particulier, on a tendance plutôt à peut-être très mal utiliser cette notion de zoning. Le zoning qui est peut-être un outil plutôt bidimensionnel, technique, qui ne prend pas en considération malheureusement la population locale et plus particulièrement cette notion que je juge un peu, son utilisation a été catastrophique chez nous, c'est cette notion de circuit. Et là, je fais allusion un peu par comparaison à ce qu'a dit monsieur Carlo Francini tout à l'heure, je crois, à propos des circuits à Florence, des circuits verts, etc. Chez nous, le problème, c'est que cette notion de circuit a été exécuté comme si c'était un embellissement de pierres, de portes, de fenêtres, sans prendre en considération ce qui se passe derrière ces portes. Et c'est ça le malheur, malheureusement. Donc, on a cherché peut-être à embellir pour des visiteurs, pour des touristes, pour les autres. Et la population locale ne se sent pas du tout concernée par cette action qui paraît dans son esprit un peu bonne peut-être, mais dans son mise en application sur terrain, on a cherché qu'à peut-être embellir un cadre matériel, physique, sans se soucier du contexte social qui est malheureusement dans un état catastrophique. Et puis, bien sûr, il va y avoir des répercussions qu'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est qu'il n'y a pas assez d'entretien, on ne se sent pas vraiment directement concerné, on ne se sent pas touché par ce genre de projet. Et là, donc, le circuit, ça fait aussi partie de cette notion de zoning, malheureusement technique et bidimensionnelle. On traite uniquement des aspects techniques, mais on ne prend pas en considération la population. Et j'espère qu'il est temps, et là, j'ai entendu les vrais concepts, c'est que il faut considérer ce patrimoine comme faisant partie de la ville, tout simplement, et arrêtant de créer ces barrières entre Médina, ensemble historique, centre ancien, avec les autres parties de la ville. Non, c'est un tout et ça doit être considéré comme ça, et que chaque partie ait une certaine spécificité. Et cette notion d'étiquette qu'on voit dans nos plans d'aménagement et de gestion des villes, une zone comme ça, jaune ou rouge, je ne sais pas quelle couleur, c'est un ensemble historique, traditionnel et basta. Non, non, ça fait partie de la ville et il faut le considérer autrement. Voilà, une petite remarque, et j'aimerais bien entendre aussi une réponse par comparaison à propos des circuits verts. Je pense que c'est le cas de Florence. Comment vous avez composé avec la population locale? Et peut-être, je sais que peut-être c'est pas le moment, mais dans une autre séance, on pourrait développer un peu comment vous avez monté techniquement et financièrement, que vous avez composé avec la population et les propriétaires. Voilà, et merci beaucoup. Et encore une fois, une belle discussion et un beau débat, franchement.
Merci beaucoup. I'm going to come back now to the speakers. Yukio and Shadia, would you like to comment on the many questions that have been raised? And then I want to also give Ming, Chee and Carlo a chance to respond. Yukio, Shadia? You'll have to unmute your mic, Yukio.
Yeah.
Shadia, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to thank the case study presenters and the speakers and all the questions raised. It takes much longer than what we have to answer all the questions. I would just pick on the relationship between various categories or specifications of historic cities. This is to Daniele, actually, because I mentioned Venice as an idea of community using the museums. I know there is a big difference between the old city of Cairo, old city of Nablus, old city of Jerusalem, Tunis, and Rabat and others. It's completely different. You have here the Gamla Stan in Sweden, which is completely gentrified. You cannot describe it as a community because it is a tourist and commercial attraction, and it's an old city and it's beautiful, but I can't see any characteristics of a community. But if you go to cities like Jerusalem, where you have 40,000 people living there, so the 70% of the uses, not the areas or the spaces, are taken by residential neighborhoods and quarters from different religions and backgrounds, but they are mainly the lowest income groups, and they're only there because they pay less or they don't pay at all. And there is still, I mean, you walk the street and then you can see it, whether it's Nablus or Jerusalem or Cairo, or you can see it's different than obviously Venice or Florence, and it's a completely different world. Like we are changing between, the north and the south, the difference. But still, it's a living community. They are there. There are people living there behind these beautiful facades of Jerusalem. Maybe Mike is here and he knows. Behind these beautiful facades, you have squalors. You have people who live without basic services. It's not only in Jerusalem. It's the same in Nablus. It's the same in Cairo, where the last thing governments do is help improve if it wasn't for some NGOs and so on, help improve the living conditions of this community. And they're not going anywhere, and they are there, and they have been born there, they bring their children there, they have their schools there, and their commercial streets and bazaars and what have you. This is not only in the Middle East, it's in a number of cities. And I can detect something in Georgetown as well, because you have all these shops and people come and buy the stuff. But they are sometimes interrupted or swamped by the tourists in certain seasons. But I mean, they look at them as outsiders. They come and go, as somebody mentioned, space users. They use the space for a very short period of time. They take photos, have some food, and then leave. And I'm talking about the living people in the living cities. What do you do with these? And if you want to plan anything for success, you have to talk to them. Talk to the women particularly. We worked on housing projects in Nablus and in Jerusalem and so on. The sure failure comes if you don't talk to the woman who the housewife or the mother or the woman who lives in that house. She can tell you what she needs. She can tell you how difficult it is to shop. She can tell you how difficult it is to take her kids to school or bring them back from school. What sort of security do they have in terms of drugs and stuff like that? You have problems in these cities. And we talk about protecting the heritage. I am a heritage person. I am old enough to be a heritage person. I'm historic as well. But I can see that it's got nothing to do with them. They don't understand what it means. So I think when I talked before about who would be the liaison between, and that goes also for reconstruction of destroyed historic cities. You have to talk to women, you have to take to the young generation, and that will be the liaison. And the future is with the youth. Engage them, talk to them, and bring them into meetings. You don't have to just talk to the local councillors and the elected mayors and so on. These live there, and these people live there, and they own the place, and they deserve to be here. And Venice has a completely different point of view, but I say, allow these people also to enjoy their cities. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yukio, please go ahead.
Thank you. There are a lot of very interesting questions. The most, difficult question to answer is what is the local community and what is the definition. And I think, as a planner, there's several tiers of the community. Of course, the first tier is the real estate owners or some who reside at the area. This is the first tier, because all the restriction or the regulation on the core zone was affected to that people. But at the same time, there are several commercial and other activities around that area, and also the people who are working daytime on the core zone, on coming back to the suburban area for the residential area. But the business activities and commercial activities are all related. So I think this is a second tier. And also, some people who are not residing in that area, but they have the core zone is actually really core of the identity of the city. So people are very proud of their history, and they are attached to that. So this is a kind of the mentality that can be a part of the city. So this is some sort of the community that related to that area. So we cannot neglect that area, the people. So there are several tiers. Of course, that some planning tool to enforce the property right. Maybe we need to listen to the owner, but sometimes the regulation is much more wider, and we listen to all the wider community who are interested in the core area. So there are a variety of the definition of the tiers. That is my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask Ming, Chee, and Carlo very briefly to respond, so then we can go back to further questions. Go ahead, Ming, Chee. We don't hear you. We still don't hear you. Maybe we come back to you. We ask Carlo to speak first and come back to you. Carlo, please go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe it's a paradox, this situation, because the pandemic, COVID-19, is for us is a great occasion to recreate a particular attention from the local community to the heritage, and we have the real number inside the museum on the other institutional gardens is only Florentine or near Florence. It is incredible, the participant, the willingness to have heritage. And in the case of the itinerary, green itinerary, it's very incredible because in 30 years ago is a normal place for the life of the Florentine life, for the young people. For example, the idea of Boboli Garden on the fortress, Belvedere Fortress, and I think now is very, very, it's a real challenge for us to recreate this strong connection with the heritage for the local community. Yeah, and the local community is a great debate, because what is the local community in this moment? This moment, yes, it really is a local community. But for example, the city user, the man and the woman went in Florence for a job. Is very important to create this type of connection, and maybe is the real challenge for us, for the site manager, but I think for everyone, is not back in time in the same no management of the tourism, because this is the real problem. In the historic cities, normally in Italy, Daniele Pini, Spanish, Florence, and the other city in Italy, is very important to enhance the idea, the awareness of the idea of this the real key is the managed tourism, not only the idea of the spread tourism, not only spread tourism, managed tourism. I think is very important. But the green topic, I think, is very, very important, because it is a natural connection with the community. After the phase, the lockdown phase, after the lockdown phase, now the people of Florence, I think in every part of the world, is the idea, the necessary of the idea of the green area space.
Thank you very much. Anne, please go ahead.
All right. Do you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I would like to answer on the practical mechanism. So over here, I have to explain that my office, I'm not a part of the civil service. And then the government established us as a non-statutory agencies that, we can hire professionals in our team. So, having a non-statutory site management agency at a World Heritage Site is very useful, because the local community is more open and they feel more comfortable to come and communicate and be truth of a lot of illegal activities, constructions, renovations that they might need help. We provide free consultations for them. In particular on the heritage building and materials, and advise them to go through the channels and guide them to go through how to apply, for the proper permits. I think as a bridge, the interpretation and be able to empathize with the needs of the local community
the budget that they have and the needs of the space that they want to use. I think that is very important. And number two, I also did try in 2018 that we want to push for the disaster risk management within the site. So one of the things to do that is like we offer free fire extinguisher and smoke detectors to anyone who come and registers. And by having that, people come forward and contact us, and we inquire them to participate in our training, and there is only 1-day training. And from that, we encourage people to participate and to safeguard of the site. So I think we can be very creative, but we have to use approach that the local community are more willing to accept. So this is some of the sharing that I want to say over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have a long list of speakers, which we are very thrilled with. So Liz first, and then we have Gurmeet Rai, Sana Nair, and we have Rosabella and Medani. Liz, please go ahead. We have to unmute your mic. Liz, you have to unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good evening from Australia. It's very late here and it's lovely to speak to you from all over the world. I'd like to bring a context outside of the context of World Heritage Cities, because there are many cities, of course, not inscribed on the World Heritage List, that face problems of the community, in a sense, being politically and strategically ignored, because the economic drive of the city from a few stakeholders is to make money out of property. And heritage can be seen to be getting in the way of that. And so that, for example, in preparing planning schemes and reviewing planning schemes, and I can think of 3 cities in Australia at the moment, Adelaide, where I live, Melbourne and Sydney, when reviewing planning schemes, which you are strategically required to do, let's say every 5 years, the ear of the developer is very strong in the politicians' minds. And not only that, and we don't have bad corruption here, but developers donate to political parties and elections come around. And what happens is that when people want to be re-elected as either state-level politicians or local politicians, they are very much beholden to the development sector. So my question and my discussion in this is that the community is not just the people who live and inhabit, and there's a broad spectre of the people that stakeholders within the community, but it's also the power brokers. And sadly, so much of our heritage is under threat because it is essentially big business that wants to push the community aside and to continue to speculate and make money out of heritage, and to do that weaken heritage protection. And I see this a lot in Asia, where I've worked a lot in cities where their only protective mechanism is often World Heritage listings. And there are many cities that are just sort of, in a sense, thrown to the political dogs without the framework of statutory heritage protection. And it's a very difficult baton, and it goes in waves. You know, we started all of this in the West, in a sense, in the 60s with people like Jane Jacobs. We made many wins in the 1970s, and now back in 2020, I think we're kind of back to sometimes where we were there, but the actual base of heritage fabric has been so much whittled away and diminished. And I'm not trying to sound negative, but I'm bringing pragmatic situations of politics and political influence into the discussion about community and how strongly the community can be listened to or not.
Thank you very much. We have now Gurmeet Rai. Gurmeet Rai, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. It's wonderful to be at this on this forum, and it's a wonderful topic today, which is on the well-being of local communities. I have a couple of observations here, and I am primarily speaking from the context of India and maybe other countries in South Asia as well. Now, when we're talking about well-being of local communities, and as Professor Nishimura said, that the communities are very diverse here, and they have been impacted by the pandemic in very, very different ways. So some of them have been socially impacted, others economic, some psychological, some have had issues related to access to essential services. And here I'm kind of considering historic cities, which are largely very dense fabric. And I'm not differentiating between a World Heritage city and a non-World Heritage cities. I'm looking at just historic cities. Now, the point is that what I'd like to highlight here is that the narratives which make way to the articulation of the outstanding universal values are not very local. And they are something which is more the perspective, things that have been documented in the colonial period, in fact. And the post-colonial narratives do not find their ways into the definition of outstanding universal value. Local histories, local aspirations, local cultures are not adequately represented even within the criteria 6. So that is a huge problem. Now, if we were to look at this crisis, and in my memory, or I think several of us, most of us, the response of local communities to a crisis, and if we were to park that on one side in the context of historic environment, and on the other hand, we park on the other side that we all understand as heritage practitioners that heritage is a tool for community well-being, and we've learned that, we've seen that in our practice. But however, if we were to map the kind of systems of communities that came into play in terms of looking after addressing the need of the vulnerable communities during the pandemic, like for instance in India, we've had the artisan, the community very, very seriously adversely impacted because of the pandemic for economic reasons. We've had the migrant workers who largely find their housing in historic areas hugely impacted. They've left for their villages. They don't want to come back to the cities. Now, if we were to look at what systems came into play to address the needs of the vulnerable communities, these narratives, these groups of people never find their way into conversations on heritage, even if we are looking at historic environment. So my question really would be that, I kind of, what Professor Nishimura said and what Shadia said completely resonated with me, that somewhere our capturing of who matters, whose heritage, whose narrative for historic city management, for recognizing groups, by recognizing, giving them dignity, is somewhere missing. Even if we were to look at the UNESCO tools for historic city management, that somewhere this is amiss. It is not being adequately understood and addressed at the local level. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Gurmeet. I want to move now to Sana, Nia.
Oui, bonjour. Je voudrais partager avec vous une expérience relative donc à la communauté locale, mais dans certaines villes du Maghreb, entre autres. On a un phénomène d'exode rural qui s'est développé durant les dernières décennies. Et cet exode rural, enfin les personnes qui viennent donc des villages avoisinants aux villes ou de villes de l'intérieur des pays, je parle entre autres des villes côtières, eh bien, ils sont attirés donc par les centres historiques. Pourquoi? On l'a déjà mentionné, parce que les loyers sont assez bas, donc les gens vont vers les centres historiques et ils les quittent aussitôt qu'ils établissent une situation financière un peu meilleure. Et donc, ça devient des zones de passage. Donc, les gens ne restent pas, ils viennent, ils y vivent un certain moment et puis ils repartent et il y a une autre population qui vient. Et donc, cette problématique fait que les gens qui habitent souvent certains quartiers historiques, pas forcément de villes patrimoine mondial, mais peut-être de villes qui ont la possibilité de le devenir un jour. Et donc, les habitants ne sont pas forcément attachés à ces quartiers historiques. Et donc, on sait très bien que l'attachement et l'identification avec un patrimoine est très important. Et donc, je réfléchis toujours sur comment est-ce qu'on peut remédier à ça, comment on peut faire en sorte que les habitants qui viennent, même s'ils passent peu de temps, qu'ils puissent reconnaître cette valeur historique et patrimoniale et qu'ils puissent aussi donc y vivre d'une manière plus respectueuse de ce patrimoine. Donc, et ajouter à cela, par contre, si on va un peu plus loin dans les nouveaux quartiers des villes, des habitants ont cet attachement avec les villes historiques parce que c'est des habitants de la ville, c'est-à-dire c'est des anciens habitants de la ville autant que globalité, et ils ont cet attachement même s'ils ne vivent pas au centre historique. Donc un peu cette relation avec une vision plus globale de qui est la communauté locale, donc qui a un intérêt vers ce patrimoine. Et aussi, je voulais juste parler un peu de l'initiative très intéressante de la ville de Florence, qui est donc de relier les espaces, la route qui relie les espaces verts, et donc l'importance des espaces verts dans la santé, enfin dans le well-being. Et je me demande si il ne serait pas intéressant d'avoir une relation avec les organismes de santé, parce que il y a donc on a remarqué que le confinement a eu vraiment un impact très important sur la santé mentale, entre autres, des habitants. Et donc, je peux peut-être donc voir comment les sensibiliser plus les habitants des villes à l'importance donc du patrimoine donc de ces espaces verts, mais avec un travail en collaboration avec les organismes de santé. Voilà, merci.
Thank you very much. I want now to request Rosabella. Rosabella had a question. Rosabella Alvarez Calderon. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello. Yes. Well, hello. It's for me. It's very early in the morning. This whole thing started at 6 a.m. for me. So I'm from Lima, Peru, and we have 3 cities here that are World Heritage Sites. And one of the things that, so I had a few questions. I have participated both as a UNESCO consultant and as a consultant for projects. And one of the big things is about how do you do the practical side of engaging with community? Because when you do open meetings, it's always the same thing. The most assertive people and the people who speak the loudest tend to be the ones who get heard. And usually there's a lot of power dynamics going on in place that people tend to be afraid that if they don't speak up, their voices are not going to be heard, which means that usually the least assertive people and the most vulnerable voices tend not to be heard, and it becomes more of like a power structure. So I'm very interested in seeing how other mechanisms to practically engage and reach out. And my second question has to do with a lot another of the questions they have already talked about. I also want to refer to the comment on the OUV, the troubles when your OUV becomes outdated, which has also happened here a lot, but also referring to markets in historic cities, which tend to be one of the most, there tend to be a lot of stakeholders, from merchants to buyers to shoppers to suppliers. But what happens when the one thing that we give the city a lot of its value, a lot of its commercial activity, can also tend to be the thing that destroys it. Here, our central market, a lot of the historic city is being ravaged to make way for storage space, usually in the most vulnerable buildings. And even as people who live there have told me, even if your building is not affected, how can you live in a place where there's trucks coming in at all hours of the night, supplies being loaded and unloaded, and not to mention the risk of fires? We've had several huge fires, devastating, and which devastated people, devastated property. The last fire that we had, we were extremely lucky that it happened on a Good Friday, and it destroyed a historic building which housed the school. So we're so lucky that it happened on a Good Friday, which means that nobody was killed, but it could have been disastrous. So what happens when the same thing, so first thing is, how do you really engage in a practical terms with community? I really want to hear what positive experiences have you had, especially reaching out to communities and groups that don't ever get heard. And what happens when you have these sort of situations where the a part of the community that gives value, economic value, and gives life can also destroy the community, destroy not people's lives, destroy community, promote not really gentrification, more of just of a commercialization of the fabric. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Rami Daher, please go ahead.
Thank you. I don't really have a question, but I want to share something and our experience from a city in Jordan, which is Salt, basically. Now, it's not a World Heritage City, but it's a historic city with a very significant historic core. And one of the main very important issues I want to raise are 2 points. One point is the role of individuals and the role of like pilot projects. I mean, before even COVID-19, this is a city where the citizens take a lot of pride in their city, and especially the coexistence and habitation between Christians and Muslims in this particular city in general, and also how the link between the tangible and the intangible have really reshaped the attributes of the city, whether it's architecture, urban, but also the intangible heritage. And they take a lot of pride also in the notion of urban hospitality that is kind of like entwined between tribal but also urban traditions all through the years. It's very much like a living heritage because its markets are and historic streets are visited by the local community, people from other cities and so on. So we talk a lot about management plans and talk a lot about municipalities engaging stakeholders and what have you. But in this particular case, because sometimes a lot of stakeholder analysis happens only once or twice and it's not an ongoing process. So I want to emphasize 2 points. The first point is sometimes the role of certain individuals and certain pilot projects and their impact rather than like a meta-narrative planning scheme when we talk about heritage. They have, in this particular city, before and after COVID-19, have established different programs to promote an interactive engagement between the local community, women, where they and families, they actually invite people to their houses, various trails that talk about the intangible and the intangible attributes. And after COVID-19, this has been very popular with domestic tourism from the city itself, but also from the surroundings. And also the relationship with the hinterland, which is very important for the city. So the point is, sometimes I think we need to concentrate a little bit on these very individual success stories, even though they're not part of larger plans and so on. The second point is...
Could I ask you to please be brief?
Sure, I'll be very brief. The second point is about the dangers and the adverse effect due to development on the attributes of the city. In this particular example, there has been a lot of debate on the level of understanding. How do you understand the attributes and how do you understand the OUV? And we depended a lot on type of morphological understanding of the city that has shaped the type of development.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great. Can I invite Medani? Medani, please, can you take the floor?
Okay. First, thank you so much for inviting me to participate on this interesting debate. Thank you also for all the presenters. So I would like to highlight, in our case, is the World Heritage properties as city centers, and because of that, it is the hub of the commercial activities, the economic activities. So badly it's affected not only the World Heritage, the community which are living in the World Heritage site, but the peripheral neighborhoods. So I would like to learn and ask for the presenters from George Towns and other cities which are already experimented. Now we are under lockdown. People are still, in a great health crisis and so on. So how can we take recovery measures for the people which are affected on the city center in the one-age property? Thank you so much for your...
Thank you very much. I see that we still have 3 hands up. I don't know how we can come back to the speakers after that. I would ask you to be really very brief in your interventions. We have only about 8 minutes left to wrap up, and we close the list at this point for today. Parastu Eshati, please go ahead.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, unfortunately there is a problem. I cannot share my video. I don't know what's this. My question is about the Plan Georgetown from Miss Ang. Miss Ang, you mentioned the role of local tourism in Penang during the pandemic, that the number of national and international tourists has been decreased. I would like to know that, do you have any special plan to encourage local people to participate? As I know you have a very young and creative team, I would like you have any innovative method to encourage local people or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then we have Russell Gold from IUCN. Please, if you could keep it really, really short. And then Adnan for a second intervention, please, really short. Russell?
Well, I just wanted to ask about metrics, methodologies, indicators, indices. What exists that we can use to actually monitor and evaluate the efficacy and impact of Hull? Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Adnan.
Oui, juste un mot, une seconde. Est-il temps vraiment maintenant d'abandonner cette qualification de zone? Zone, je pense, à mon avis, que c'est un peu réducteur et ça renvoie vers une qualification comme nos anciens centres ou nos villes anciennes sont un peu à l'écart de la ville tout entière. Voilà, c'est peut-être un lapsus révélateur qu'on a utilisé à plusieurs reprises lors de ce débat. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. I want to come back now very quickly for 1 minute responses each from Shadia, Yukio, and then Ming, Chee, and Carlo, and then I want to respond as well. Shadia, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, which is difficult for me. But I mean, I would just say I'm very pleased with various questions and issues that were raised. I think it gives us all food for thought. I don't think we can reach within this session any conclusions or recommendations, but with the passion that everybody has shown and expressed in their intervention, we have, and thank you very much, the World Heritage City Department, our center, for bringing this issue, the issue of local communities and their well-being. I think it's probably one of the few times that we had enough discussions on this issue and come up with all sorts of ideas and focus on many problems. There is more to be done, and Jyoti, we put more pressure on you, I think, in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We try our best. Yukio, please go ahead.
You always do.
Thank you. Two things. One is the zoning, the last comment on zoning. And I think that zoning is very conventional, two-dimensional way. As a planner, is outdated particularly for the heritage area. We need the very, very innovative three-dimensional regulations to introduce. Maybe our approach is very key to understand that, to share the much more advanced way. This is one comment. Second comment is narratives. The Ms. Ray of India mentioned that the OUV narratives are sometimes very far from the local communities. Yes, I think it's very true. I think, but narratives is very important. But at the same time, I think we need to develop the narratives for each community, how to attach their activity to the core of the city. So it is a kind of local narrative for each community. And this is the responsibility of the planners and the heritage manager to think about it. This is the good way to build each narratives and then move to the international narrative, that is OUV. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now going to Ang. Ang, are you able to connect? Can you speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm trying to answer in the chat group also about how to communicate with people. But in order to answer on the local tourism, I think it's very important now to create the trust, because in Georgetown, getting clear from active COVID-19 cases for more than 50 days. Everyone in the site observe the SOP of like wearing masks and then clean your hands all the time. So everyone have to work together to make our site safe. With this, local tourism, local residents, local community, they will come back to the site. But remember, physical distancing, but socially engaged. So this is the simple answer, but everyone have to work together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Carlo, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you really everybody, because it's a very precious occasion to debate around the management of the World Heritage Site. And I think really this is the occasion to recenter the idea, focus the idea around the community, because this is a special, unfortunately, is really a special occasion to recreate the connection with the community and heritage. And another aspect to enhance during the COVID is the digital technologies. Maybe digital technologies is a very important key to involve in the participation process, not only old generation, young generation, really. And I think it's very, very, very interesting, the possibility to create really narrative or the other occasion to recreate a connection with the community. Digital and well-being, safety is very important. And maybe is the real challenge for the next update of management. And I think it's very important, the idea of the Eduardo Rojas, the connection with the urbanistic plan and management plan. Is impossible to create two separate occasions. Yeah, is specifically this instrument is very different, but it's very important to create a route for the best of the city, and I think this is very important. Really, thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much. Now, before we explain the assignment, which is the group work, I just want to respond to a couple of points that have come up. One is the question on OUV, and I think it was brought up both by Gurmeet and by Rosabella, and the relevance to local communities. And I just want to be very clear that the OUV is what the site is inscribed for. The World Heritage Property is inscribed for its OUV. And this is not something that we negotiate or change locally by any means. And the idea is that it's outstanding, universal. So it's beyond the local, the meaning of that place. It's inscribed because it's valuable to the whole world, to humanity at some level. And that's the value that we have to protect then. And that's the obligation, in a sense, that is necessary. But at the same time, there are, and I completely understand, there are local values. And that's exactly why I went over in quite rapidly, but what we discussed in January and what I was sharing with you was the idea of attributes of urban heritage identity, which really have to do a lot with this, and the local and the description of local significance, which may be historical significance, which is very local. But you do need, in the process of protecting, in the process of urban development, to integrate these other values also. Because if you only go about protecting the OUV and forget about anything that's local, obviously it's not going to work for the local community. So if it has to work for the local communities and has to work for OUV, that's what we have to arrive at. The second point I wanted to mention is about the indicators that Russell brought up, and I'm going to again point very briefly to the fact that we don't have indicators specifically for HUL. What we've developed at UNESCO, and that's what I was sharing with you very briefly in the presentation, and we'll certainly send you links on, is indicators for measuring the role and contribution of culture in the 2030 agenda. And this is the Culture 2030 indicators, which can be implemented at the local level, at the urban level. And these are across all the 6 culture conventions. So it's tangible, intangible heritage, museums, illicit trafficking, all of it. But it gives you an idea of how the city is performing in terms of the culture's role in the 2030 agenda. So this is something that we can share with you. Now, a lot of wonderful, I really, first of all, thank you for all the passion that you've brought to this discussion, all the amazing ideas. It's incredibly rich. What we want to do is, you've raised a lot of very important questions. And obviously in a matter of 2 hours, we're not going to find all these answers. We are setting up groups. We're dividing the entire group of participants into groups. And we are setting up these groups on Teams, and you will be receiving emails right after this meeting on which group you're part of, and you can access your team within the Microsoft Teams. I think you were all asked to set up those accounts already. And we want that the homework assignments will be, which is group work assignments, basically to come up with strategies, to come up with innovative solutions to the questions that have been raised. That will be part of this, these teams. And the teams we are trying to organize according to time zones, which means according to regions, for ease of work. So if you decide that you would like to meet your team members on Teams, you're welcome to do that, because Teams allows you to have a group meeting. But if you prefer to just do it through written notes, so that's your choice in the team. And on the last session on the 26th, all the homework of each of the teams will be presented. So just to let you know, that's the process, so that there is, some amount of reflection that can happen in terms of translating all the questions that have been raised and some really interesting solutions that have been brought up, and translating that into more specific kind of strategies that we can take on board. Any questions or thoughts or clarifications on this? It's not frightening, so I'm really worried when I see absolute silence. I think it's supposed to be fun and intensive, and I hope that you will enjoy and be able to carry this debate forward, because in an online situation, it's very difficult to expect everybody to be online discussing for 8 hours in a day. So we thought this might be a better way to give room for some of these ideas to percolate and have something more concrete that you can come out with. So you have a day and a half, essentially, or 2 days, because it's from now until we meet next time, which is on Monday afternoon. So with that, I want to say thank you to our leads today, Shadia and Yukio, and for the amazing case studies of Ang and Carlo, and to all the participants for your wonderful questions, your engagement, the thoughts that you shared. Absolutely, and I really appreciate the energy with which you disagree with the way things are and how you want to change them. I hope by the end of this meeting we get to do all of that, and we look forward to continuing our work with you and Thanks to the teams who've been supporting all the work, to our tech team who have been incredible, and thank you to the translators. And we see you on Monday. Bye-bye.